Hello and welcome to Sleep is My Waking Passion, the podcast where we get real about sleep and how it shapes your life. I'm Dr. Allison Cole, a triple-boarded pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine physician who's learned to thrive despite having chronic insomnia. And now I'm here to help you do the same. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. Today, I have Mollie Eastman with me. She is a social media sensation, darling. She is really well respected in the sleep community. And she really has, I would call you a grassroots sleep expert. Like, you really figured out a way to figure out how to sleep better by utilizing resources that are out there and then creating a program around it. So she is the creator of Sleep is a Skill. She also happens to be the host of the number 2 sleep podcast right now, which is the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Who's number 1? Is it Chris Winter? I think it's Chris Winter, no?
That's a really good question. I got to double check. There was a couple ones kind of popping in and out. It might be Chris at this point. There was also the Sleep Coach School was one that was popping in there. So we'd have to double check. This is off of Listen Notes. Kind of has a running ranking ongoing.
I don't know where I am at, but I'm clearly at the bottom. But that's okay.
I do not think so. You're doing fantastic.
Listen to me because I get to have Mollie Eastman on. So that's pretty cool. She's on over 150 podcasts. So she is gracing me with her presence, which is amazing. Now, what I want to talk about with her specifically is it's a little bit about the company that she has and what she offers to clients, because she really has a nice, sophisticated, unique, technology-forward spin on how to manage difficulty with sleep. She optimizes people's sleep through her unique blend of tech, accountability, and behavioral change, all of which is really scientifically rooted. She's had insomnia herself, so she understands what I understand, which is just how difficult it is to change the circumstances, change your attitude about sleep, and find a way through the muck when you literally feel like you're going insane because you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
Hers was precipitated by a combination of stress, taking her company on the road, along with her fiance at the time, and he had his company on the road, and they were jet setting and traveling the world. But then there was that pesky thing called jet lag that we don't think about sometimes when we go on these adventures, and then we come to realize we're like, uh-oh. And so she needed to figure out a way to really wrap her head around that and wrap her head around how she talks about sleep. So she has something called Optimize Your Sleep, which is a course that actually is really a group course. So it's taking a small cohort of people and working with them to optimize their sleep. She has partnered with luxury hotels and brands. She has a very impressive online store on her website. So I highly encourage you to check it out. We're going to have all of the links in her description so that you can reach her. But welcome, Mollie. I'm so excited to have you.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Oh,
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for that thoughtful and generous introduction. You really told the whole story of the fact that I love what you said about the grassroots. It's so true. I am just as surprised as anyone that I have a whole career in sleep, because that was not really the original, direction of my life. And it wasn't until I was so gripped by this conversation of insomnia that everything changed for me. And I'm really grateful to say that on the other side of it, while during it, it felt like one of the most challenging things that I navigated in my life. On the other side of it, the things that I learned in the process. So if anyone is, listening and going through any sort of sleep struggles in that domain, hold on. There's so many things that we can do, and what's available are really incredible breakthroughs and insights, and an opportunity on the other side to live life, powerfully, and not to discount that it can really take something. And that's really why I'm committed to this relationship to sleep, being a skill set of something that no matter where you might be at right now, if you're 101, 301, whatever, in your relationship to your sleep, that there's always things that we can do to take things to the next level to really manage our biology. And of course, there's so many directions we can go in this conversation, but knowing that there's, by different accounts, over 100 different sleep-wake disorders, depending on which, ranking you go with, there's many areas of sleep that can be optimized. And what is there is getting into these conversations a bit more, looking at these things that we're this process that we do every single night, and maybe just helping to support it newly. And that can mean different things in different situations. So, insomnia, we might really look at very differently than sleep optimization or sleep apnea, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot from an awareness perspective that we can glean.
You said something that I think is so telling, which is you're teaching a skill set. And why I think that's so telling is, when do you perceive that you are struggling with your sleep? Either because you have insomnia, you've another untreated sleep disorder, or you just feel as though your life has spun to the point where you just can't prioritize sleep. It's just, There's too much else going on, and sleep just falls to the very, very bottom of priorities. It feels almost overwhelming and as though you're never going to fix it.
Yeah.
And so when you learn the skills to be able to do so, what I would say is it's one of the ultimate challenges, because in order to be, quote, good sleeper, be good at sleep, you need to kind of let it go.
And it's so hard.
Right?
Yes.
But what I take from you, too, is that skill set translates to other aspects of your life.
Yes.
Because once you can do this, you feel like you can do anything. You can be some crazy person who just Googles stuff and then starts a podcast like I did. I mean, you never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah.
It's so empowering. So that is such a great statement. Now, I wanted to start by asking you, because I really found it quite profound. I'm a little obsessed with it these days because I think it's a very underappreciated, important fact about people who struggle with their sleep, which is the concept of labels. You've described how you used to think of yourself. And I think perception often becomes our reality.
Yes.
And that's a universal theme, but particularly important in sleep. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because despite the fact that just a few minutes ago, I just mentioned that we would treat insomnia very differently than certain sleep disorders or sleep optimization, at the very same time, part of what we would, or what I like to bring to the conversation with people that are struggling with some difficulties at the moment of falling asleep or staying asleep, is helping to dissolve the sense of pathology, as if this is a fixed way of being, as if this is something that they are stuck with or born with, or it's in their genes, or, their parents dealt with this, or their grandparents, or whatever. This whole world that gets created when we latch on to some of these labels. And it's particularly important, I believe, in this, in areas in which there's this requires or calls for letting go, as you pointed to. And sleep is so paradoxical, especially for most of the people, myself included, most of the people that I'm working with, can often fall into a bit of a category of type A, if you will, or perfectionistic tendencies, or some of these, they might fall in this kind of spectrum of trying to get it right, forcing things, and yet sleep is so paradoxical, and as if it's, akin to Chinese finger trap, and the more we force it, the more it kind of becomes elusive. And so these labels can support, unfortunately, in the negative sense, a continuation of patterns and behaviors, and the brain searching out to have ammunition and evidence to support that, yes, I am a bad sleeper, and it's always going to be this way, and night after night, kind of exposure therapy in the opposite sense, not a positive sense, kind of a nocebo effect. And so that's what we want to try to unravel and start to kind of shift the conversation, that while it's a snapshot in time that we've been struggling, we want to unravel what's underneath that and support a transformation to a new identity of a great sleeper, and one that has this come to them more with ease.
I cannot even tell you. I'm just thinking back to the labels that I didn't even realize I had for myself.
Yeah.
And I think even if you were to say, hey, what's your label or how do you define yourself? I could have told you that I'm like, I just don't sleep well. It's been sort of a chronic thing, no big deal. It's just what it is. Like I require less sleep because that's how I get through my day to day. But that's a really superficial response, right? If I take it to the next level, and believe me, type A, perfection. Hello, I'm a home crit sleep doc. I'm a glutton for punishment. And I'm like, why get like one board when you can get 3? And I'm not even as bad as some people who have 4 because I dropped the internal medicine. I was like, 4 is too much.
4 is too much. That's my limit.
Woo!
Love it.
But really what it came down to is when I think back, I really never perceived that I could be successful. This started really when I went into college, and then I was really like, okay, I'm going to do the pre-med thing.
Yes.
How do we become successful? I know the bar is set so high. How do I ever achieve that? And it really was, I don't believe that sleep is going to help me get a leg up. Studying all night and then going in to take that test with minimal sleep, I'm more likely to be successful because I stuck one more fact in my brain than if I actually prioritize my sleep. And I realized that was a philosophy I had for many, many, many years. And it just finally got to the point where I was like, oh, wait, I've sort of like evolved out of that. But I look back knowing all the literature we know about how important it is and how much better people perform when they actually do sleep. I almost wish I could go back in time and say, I wonder if I did this over and I actually prioritized my sleep, would I have been even better? Like, would I have been more equipped to handle stress and some of the other things that we go through in our process of just evolving as humans and being high achievers,
And you might have been in, you could argue that there could be a conversation for groupthink that you might have been present to within that field, so within the medical space, there often can be a bit of a groupthink, unfortunately, because of the structure and systemically seeing sleep deprivation just its prevalence and so conditioned or accepted and maybe even encouraged in certain domains. And so seeing from a groupthink perspective that we tend to meld ourselves to what others are doing and the way they're managing themselves as well. So there could be multi-layers to this kind of labels as well.
That is such a great point because you take it a step further, right? You take it to society level.
Yeah.
Or you mentioned groupthink, then you take it to society. And when I think of my children who are now 7 and 9, they're little kids, they're sleeping like gems. I'm enjoying my honeymoon period. But as they go into middle school and as they go into high school, we then talk about chronobiology that I know you love so much.
Yes.
We now have kids that naturally are going to want to stay up later. They're naturally going to want to sleep in with that opportunity. And we're like, oh no, you need to get up before your parents practically get up and you need to get on a school bus and you need to go and do your thing. Yeah. So we're not even teaching good skills to our kids. We're sort of ingraining the concept of you don't really need sleep. It's not that important. So what a great conversation. So that is perfect because this is something that's very near and dear to your heart. And I was hoping that you could share with people what you've learned about chronobiology and maybe some ways for people to think about it and how they can apply that to their life.
Absolutely.
Practically.
Yeah, absolutely. So chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects our biology. And one of the reasons that this was so transformative in my own life, you shared about my story. And for further context, I grew up in a trailer with, no money in the middle of nowhere, Maine. So when I started traveling and experiencing that, pronounced jet lag, I'd never experienced anything like that. The amount of stress that both my husband and I were under with our businesses and a number of things, it was a perfect storm. And I experienced, this difficulty not difficulty was like an understatement. It felt like a real crisis, with my sleep and my life, and so the result of that was to really figure out what does it take to get great sleep. And part of the process, unfortunately, the further angst was that at different points I went to various doctors along the way and I was traveling. So it was in random places. I found myself in a little spot in Croatia, Budapest, just all these different, Madrid, different places. And I would leave with various sleeping pills and no real plan. Now, of course, we know that the first line treatment is supposed to be, at least in the United States, CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So if anyone's listening, that's not necessarily the track that we would like to see people going down, but that's what happened for me. And so that was frightening for me because it felt like, okay, now I'm taking these very real, medications with no real plan. They're supposed to be used for short-term or approved for short-term use, but it looks like I'm, stepping into this long-term usage, and how do I get off of these and all of these things. So I say all that because part of what was upside down for me and my lifestyle with both myself and my husband was this relationship to how things are from a diurnal perspective. So of diurnal creatures, we are meant to be active by day and at rest at night. And there's a simplicity to that. And yet we were really skewing very, very late. So we would say things like, we're extreme night owls, or we're, we get most of our great work done in the wee hours of the morning, and it'd be all justified and righteous about this. And so what that would look like was waking up much later than the average person would be waking up, then kind of just feeling awful, having lights super dim, barely getting outside until much later. And then upside down life, because then as the evening would go on, flipping on all the lights. So basically it's like dim in the day, bright at night, eating into the late hours, exercising later, everything skewed, backloaded, essentially. That is wake promoting, but not necessarily realizing that at the time, or the detriments that could bring about, especially as getting older. Maybe some of those things that you can potentially get away with in your, teens, 20s, et cetera, start to show up differently as we age, potentially for many individuals. So all that to say that what astounded me as I started looking at what can I do to restore the workability of my sleep was this world of chronobiology. And what was so shocking about this is that there are so many things that tell the body what time it is and what to be doing when. And unbeknownst to me, I was giving my body all of these counter signals or confusing sets of information. And so the peeling back the layers on that allowed for this kind of natural protocol to emerge from the domain of circadian rhythm entrainment. And anyone can look up circadian rhythm entrainment if they so choose. There are really fascinating studies looking at just how much and how greatly we can shift our circadian or our tendencies, so our kind of sleep-wake cycle, by changing around some of these clear elements in how we're running our days and our life. So from that place, what I started with was looking at light dark, and that's really where we start everyone in our cohorts, is with our light dark cycles and the consistency of our sleep wake time, so we can get more in depth on those if helpful.
I love that you said that, and I also love that you mentioned the fact that as we age, things change, right? So if you're with your significant other and you're traveling and you are in your 20s, it is actually quite natural to almost still have more of that delay to your sleep. We can exacerbate it, as you mentioned, getting the bright light at the wrong time, exercising late at night, sleeping in. Like, we can perpetuate that cycle. But really, it is something that often we may still kind of get into that. But as you kind of move toward your 30s, many of us will kind of everything starts to shift a little bit early. And then you get to be in your 40s like me, and you're like, oh, is it 9 o'clock? Can I go to bed now? Hello?
Yes,
exactly. And then as we get older, hopefully I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, I'm ready for bed at 7 p.m. I don't want to turn into a lark. I can tell you that. I'd rather stay up a little bit later. I know what I'm going to do, which is get some light at night if that's the case. But that being said, like you said, you're paying attention to when you're getting light, when you're getting dark, and that really light is one of those really great zeitgebers. These sort of keeps us in this routine and helps us, our bodies kind of re-equilibrate, and that's the joy of being creatures. We're all animals at the end of it. We're sophisticated and we have fun things like technology and computers and stuff. But at the end of the day, we're ultimately animals, and we've evolved to require rest. And we require that when we see light, it goes into our brain. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, or little timekeeper, goes, oh, I see light now. Okay. And then, you mentioned exercise, but the other thing too is when you eat, right? You mentioned eating. All of these things, we don't even realize it, but there's like pretty much all of our organs have some sort of a circadian something going on, even if we haven't yet discovered it. We clearly are very much on a time schedule within our being, just as an organism that exists. So I think it's so key. I think where it can be really challenging is sometimes we have people who, I don't know the true answer to this other than you do the best you can, but there's people who naturally are like, yeah, I'm really a morning person, but the only job I could get, I got to be up all night. And I can only say that I deeply empathize because that for me was what set my latest bout of insomnia off when I was working during COVID and we kind of moved to this like shift work. And I was like, oh, this is going to be bad. This is going to be bad. And you could say that maybe it was me not presenting good vibes into the universe. Fair enough. But it was bad. Like I had 2 toddlers stuck in the house, screaming at the top of their lungs. And I'm like, I can't soundproof I guess I could try, but I don't know. I don't want to live in a cave either. Like it just was very unnatural for me. And I'd worked so hard to do exactly what you mentioned in training.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, it's going to be a challenge. I don't know if you've had people like this and if there's anything that you found kind of works. I know there's no quick fixes and it's a much bigger discussion, but I was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, really good points. Well, I would say a few things. One, we have kind of a ranking of hierarchy of some of these things, and you pointed to some of the distinctions around things like our Zeitgebers, for instance. And so some of the things that we know appear to bring about bigger weight or greater weight to that entrainment process. So we would go down that list and apply those where we can. And then, of course, there's unique situations, or I shouldn't say unique, but there's particular situations that are going to need additional ways of managing. So for instance, I should put in that I work specifically with a lot of high stakes poker players. And I mention that because they are often in a environment that's designed on purpose to confuse the circadian rhythms in casinos that are devoid of windows, nonstop stimuli, blue light and bright light, no clocks, and a lot of angsty environments, whether you've won a lot or you've lost a lot. And particularly for these high stakes players, we might be talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, depending on the situation that they're in.
I have anxiety thinking about that. Yeah. And I'm not a high stakes poker player. So.
Exactly. I know. Exactly. So that's a lot to manage. And then with the expectation to, you just won or lost a large sum of money and now go to sleep right away and then be able to get back and do the same the following day, especially if we're talking about tournaments or what have you. So, I mention all that because, despite the fact that there's a lot against them, arguably from a sleep perspective, there are still so many things that we can do to help support their sleep. So if we can do that with them, we can absolutely bring in some things for individuals, especially in situations where some things feel as if the circumstances are outside of their control to a certain extent, whether it's new babies with toddlers, a global pandemic, just some things that we might not have planned for, and so a few things that we like to do. Now, one, I can say if we're experiencing and we can take this, it would be a much longer conversation, certainly. But when we're talking about, say, shift workers, for example, we're looking to see how can we create as much of a lifestyle as possible, even if it's outside of those kind of ideal things that we were speaking to before, kind of the rhythms of nature, being a bit more in alignment with front-loading your days, but that's not always the case for certain people. So we are looking to see, can we create this lifestyle way of living so that 7 days a week that they're largely waking up and kind of being active and doing all these Zeitgeber or bringing about these Zeitgebers into their daily life at around the same times versus the tendency that can come about if those circumstances appear and we shift our behaviors, but then when those circumstances are not there, then we kind of revert to what we like to have or what have you. And that can be problematic, even though it can seem like a great idea, because you would say, well, this job requires me to be active at night, but when I have off, then I'm going to kind of go back to what I would like to do. And instead, we're looking to take on a new structure that brings about the gift of consistency, which is exactly what the body loves when we're talking about entrainment. And that has to do with what you're pointing to, that virtually every cell and organ in our body appears to have this type of clock, if you will. And these clocks are all looking to stay on time as, kind of directed by that master choreographer of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And if we are not giving it this information at those ideal times, that can be problematic. Now, also what can come about, and this is where things like CBTI or ACT or ACTI, acceptance commitment therapy for insomnia, all of these things can help support the snowballing that can often happen when our sleep isn't working, because now we might have some trouble managing our thoughts. And this is where one of the Zeitgebers that I like to bring in is what I've been calling thought timing. And with the idea that we have newer research around how our thoughts appear to exist on a circadian rhythm, which is really quite fascinating. One study that I point to is known as the mind after midnight, and the mind after midnight of how it appears that our thoughts shift in some of the kind of the way that they show up and the way that we are exhibiting some of our patterns of thinking, and have real world consequences, unfortunately, where we see suicidality rates going up in the wee hours of the morning, kind of more black and white thinking, some of that catastrophic thinking coming about in those later hours. So the more we start to be aware of some of the ways that we might be thinking in potentially kind of a flawed logic, if you will, sense at certain times, one, that awareness can help us kind of create almost a internal contract with ourselves, where in the wee hours of the morning, we're looking to not really believe a lot of those thoughts. I know that's easier said than done, but how to kind of poke holes in some of these fear-based states that we can get into when we are really struggling with our sleep, and help to regain and restore balance where possible, so that we can move in stride when these situations are happening.
I'm giving you a big clap, because that is so profound what you were saying. And one of the conundrums that always happens to folks that are struggling to sleep is then those thoughts, right? They creep in, and then we start believing them. And I also think it sometimes can be a manifestation of not building in some time earlier on in the day to just sit and be, because sometimes we're so on and we have this task and this next thing I've got to do, and we're always like, so you go, you run out of gas, and then it's almost like you can't even, then you want to scroll or kind of take your brain to a different place. But really what it needs is to just sit and be. And that's what people talk about when they talk about meditation, that sometimes people get very frustrated with that concept, but it's really true. It's almost just like sitting. We all have over 20,000 thoughts at the least, if not more, per day. Most of them are just random thoughts, but most of them often tend to be negative. And if we could just say to ourselves, hey, this is just human nature. This is our biology that says we want you to run away from badness, from the saber-toothed tiger of your mind. And we need to allow ourselves to just sort of process the fact that, oh, I just had a negative thought, but guess what? I'm going to have a positive one too, and not dwell on some of those negative thoughts. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I wanted to end on a much funner note, okay? That's a very serious note, and it's a good one, and very, very true. But I wanted to end on a funner note, which is, Mollie, you have look at this beautiful house that you're in. She's moved out of her apartment, sort of city living, into suburbia, and it's a different lifestyle. So I was curious, with someone who is so dedicated to maximizing your sleep potential, optimizing your sleep, as you like to say, what are some tips maybe as people are living in the city? Like, what have you learned about the difference? I'm gonna be completely biased here and say I would think it's easier to sleep in suburbia, simply because there's less traffic noise, it's darker if you don't have as many street lights. Those are just some like basic obvious things, but are there some other things that you've noticed that, maybe people can learn from you as to what you did to kind of maximize your sleep in perhaps a less than ideal environment?
Yes. Oh my goodness. 100%. So I lived in all the places that are kind of thought of as the places that never sleep. So I lived in both New York, Las Vegas. That's one of the reasons I work with so many poker players. So my husband did one of the largest studies ever conducted on poker players. He's was a professional poker player for a stretch, and also psychology professor, background in forensics. So would read tells at the poker table. So blending all of that together, that was kind of a whole area. And Vegas certainly is quite active. Same with New York City. We also lived in different places. So for about 3 years after that unsuccessful run of travel, thankfully, once they restored my sleep and workability there, was able to successfully go back out and travel. So lived in Thailand, Bali, other places for about 3 years back and forth to New York, and then in downtown Austin. And so have always kind of had some of that kind of apartment living or city living. And there's pluses and minuses to in all environments. So one thing that we did love, we're big walkers. And so the walkability scores in all these places that we'd often choose would be quite high. So that was fantastic. Lots of movement. But from a sleep perspective, some of the things that I'm really looking to have people be able to make a lifestyle can just be a little more challenging in those urban environments. It's not to say it's impossible, certainly, but it just takes something extra. So meaning if I'm looking for people to be able to just simply get pure unadulterated light throughout the course of the day that's not blocked by windows, because we know that windows can adulterate some of that light. So like right now I have this big sliding door, so the sun is able to still come in as I'm talking to you now, which is great. And yet in the space that we had before, in a high rise, that wasn't exactly possible, or I would have to, in between, kind of Zoom calls or what have you, go out on the balcony and get that light. Now, another controversial piece to this is that there's measurably very high EMFs in the space. Now, some people say no big deal. Some people say very problematic, but measurably high levels. So you take that what you wish. And so that further exposure, not to mention sound pollution. So there'd just be lots of ruckus happening in those environments. And you might start to have that be a little bit of a white noise. I know before we hit record, you mentioned back in the day, right? Like roommate,
Paula Veas. I'm calling you out. Paula Veas Sherman. Paula was my girl in Barnard. We shared a dorm together our freshman year, and she was a New York City girl, and she needed all the blinds up and the window cracked. So I think we compromised on blinds down, window cracked. So we had to make a compromise, but oh, that was rough, Paula. I didn't sleep very well. Anywho, that was my story.
Yes, exactly. I know. It's been a whole process for me with my husband, because he was born and raised in New York. Now, I was born in Maine, spent well over a decade in New York, so kind of through osmosis started to have a little bit of that familiarity with that kind of noise background layer of the city noise. My husband, very similar for a long time. That would be like a comforting environment for him. And yet I think that sound piece, there's the ambient light piece that is also present. So you do have to add a lot of components if you are, especially in the midst of a big city. All of that extra light that you're getting, and a divorcing of clear nature that you can be connected to in most locations, unless you're like right next to Central Park or something. But even there, you're not necessarily going to be able to see many of the stars at night, or have that true darkness that we're often, as I believe Matthew Walker has coined it, the dark deprived society, or however you want to phrase it, that often we are lacking in some of those clear, that high amplitude of bright days and dark nights, which we're really going for. And so if you are in those environments, I would argue that then it's same way I say this to shift workers, that if you're a shift worker, it's almost even more important to learn these skill sets of, chronobiology and sleep optimization. I believe that's the same for urban dwellers, because now you've got a lot of things that can kind of be further obstacles in your way. But if you learn about these things, you can start to work around them where possible. So What I would have to do is kind of just have morning walks be a part of my routine, which I still do here. But it was very, very important there because it would just be so much harder to, get in the elevator, get outside, get past the homeless person and like all the activities I would get myself as close to some sort of nature. So in Austin, I could walk along the water and there was some trees and, the body and mind craving some of that kind of grounding force. Now, of course, these are subjective things that I'm putting in there, but we do have research to support forest bathing out of research from Japan. We have certainly research to support that the individuals seem to be affected by their environment. And so just being mindful of the environment you're in. And if you're finding that's not working for you, so like for me, I'm about to turn 40 in a couple days. And because of that, or in alignment with that, one of the things that I really got clear for myself is that I want to be in more nature, more routinely, to be able to live this lifestyle that I speak to. And so living in alignment was really important to me. So, seeing what season of your life you're in, and if you're willing to do those things, for a while it was worth the trade-off of the extra effort. And now I want the ease to just have a big backyard like I'm looking at right now.
Welcome to your 40s, girlfriend. We've worked hard. Okay. It's time to spread our wings and enjoy a little bit. Mollie, this has seriously been such a super fun conversation.
The feeling is mutual.
I love that we can kind of riff off each other, kind of learn from each other. You have actually made me more confident in what I do when I do work with cognitive behavioral therapy. And I have been kicking around this framework that I created very much in alignment with what you're talking about, which is it's not just about any one particular set of criteria, which is often in medicine. We go, okay, we've done randomized trials and we have 49 studies that support that cognitive behavioral therapy is amazing. Yes, I'm not arguing with you, but it's actually more than that. There's a deeper layer to it. And so putting all of those puzzle pieces together really is how you optimize sleep. So thank you for kind of figuring all that out. And I actually have learned from this. And, it's stuff that they don't teach you. Even you have to put those pieces together, even when you have a medical background. So very impressive what you have managed to do. And bravo.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you for also your vulnerability in sharing your own experiences and your own story. I think that is just so important for listeners to get that no matter, and I think that's where the complexity of sleep comes in and the kind of the puzzle that it is, because we might have all this information, but then stress or circumstances or kids or COVID or beyond all these different variables.
More than one variable.
Yes. And often a whole swirl can throw things off. And that is so important for people to get that they're not, bad or wrong, that we're all going to greater or lesser extents, have periods of time where this kind of natural quote unquote process might be a little go awry. And then what's available is a whole set of tools and resources that we can bring in, and it might take some kind of troubleshooting, but it absolutely is possible to restore that workability. And sometimes I think when we're in a hopeless, helpless state, we can forget that.
Yes. Mindset is everything.
Yeah.
And please trust us.
Yeah.
Trust us when we tell you that you can and you will sleep better. You just have to believe it. That's step one, is just putting yourself out there to say, I can overcome this, because you can.
Yes.
And we're living proof of it. So.
Yes, exactly.
Struggling with sleep? Dr. Cole is here to help. Whether you need a comprehensive sleep coaching program, suspect you have sleep apnea, or simply seeking a second opinion, she's available for consultation in New Jersey, New York, California, and Georgia, with more states coming soon. Schedule your free 10-minute review of services today to find out which visit is right for you at AskTheSleepMD.com and start your journey to better sleep with a trusted sleep expert.
Please be advised that the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for personalized guidance. For my full disclaimer, please visit AskTheSleepMD.com And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter. Sweet dreams and happy listening.